Hi guys, I'm Dr. Whitney Costers, professor of English. I have been teaching college writing and literature for the past 20 years, and in that time, I have worked with thousands of students who struggle with one thing more than anything else: research. They know how to find information, but not how to research. They can Google, collect quotes, they can even summarize what they've read, but they don't yet know how to take that information and turn it into a real argument. So I made this video to fix that. This is a step-by-step guide to show you exactly how to do real research efficiently, intelligently, and confidently. By the end of this lecture, you will know how to move from gathering sources to building an argument that actually contributes to a conversation. And throughout, I'm going to use one example: animal rights and human responsibility, because it crosses ethics, law, science, and philosophy, and it shows what real scholarship looks like when multiple fields overlap. If you also want to see how to use and access the databases I'm going to mention today, like JSTOR, Project Muse, and EBSCOhost, I have a separate video that walks you through that process in detail. This lecture gives you the method, and that one gives you the tools. So let's start with step one, which is to rethink what research actually is. Now, most people think research means collecting information. They search online, gather a few articles that seem related to their topic, pull some quotes, and then report what they found. But really, that's not research, it's data collecting. Real research, the kind practiced in universities, the kind your professors expect of you, is about building knowledge. It's about discovering how experts talk about an issue, noticing where they agree or disagree, and finding a space where your own voice can add something new. Imagine your professor gives you the topic animal rights. Most students go straight to Google, type it in, and see thousands of results, and then they panic. So they start summarizing. This article says animals feel pain, this one says we should reduce suffering, this one says animal testing is necessary. But that's really just a list. The first step in becoming a real researcher is realizing your job isn't to collect everything that's been said. It's to figure out what's being debated and then decide where you stand in that debate. So that brings us to step two, which is to use scholarly tools, not just Google. Before you can build an argument, you need credible evidence. Your argument will only ever be as strong as the sources that it rests on. Start with scholarly databases and not search engines. So use your library's databases like JSTOR, Project Muse, Academic Search Complete, Philosopher's Index, Hein Online for law, Scopus or Web of Science for citation trails, and PubMed or PsycInfo for science and psychology. Google Scholar is fine as a supplement, but it shouldn't be your main tool. Databases let you filter by peer review, publication date, discipline, and method, so you get precision instead of noise. So next is step three, which is to filter smartly using keywords, recency, and source type. Once you're in a database, search with intention. Break your question into key concepts and combine them carefully. For instance, you might search animal rights or welfare and ethics or jurisprudence, or animal and sentience or pain and neuroscience. Limit searches to titles or abstracts to cut noise. In databases like PsycInfo or PubMed, use the controlled vocabulary called mesh terms for more accurate results. Be deliberate about document types. Empirical studies, review articles, legal analyses, philosophical arguments, and policy reports each serve a different purpose. Turn on peer review filters by default and turn them off only when you're intentionally exploring laws, policy memos, or credible gray literature. Be smart about recency. Not all new work is better, and not all old work is outdated. In philosophy and ethics, classic arguments remain relevant for decades, if not longer. In law and policy, prioritize the last 5 to 7 years plus landmark cases. In science and psychology, focus on the last 5 to 10 years for empirical claims, connecting them to earlier landmark studies. In interdisciplinary work, combine classic theory with current data and current legal context. And know what kind of source you're holding. Primary sources present original data or arguments, so court opinions, empirical studies, or philosophical essays. Secondary sources analyze or interpret those primaries, so think journal articles, meta-analyses, or law reviews. Tertiary sources like textbooks and encyclopedias summarize everything else. They're great for orientation, but not for proof. Also, know what to avoid. Wikipedia is fine for background, but not for citation. Blogs, forums, and social media show opinion, not evidence. News gives context, but not research. Advocacy or corporate sites often have agendas, so verify their data. AI-generated summaries without authors or references don't count. And watch out for predatory journals that publish without real peer review. My rule is simple. If it isn't written by an expert, reviewed by peers, or transparent about its evidence, it doesn't belong in your bibliography. Step 4 is to skim before you dive. Now that you have found reliable material, don't read every article from start to finish. Skim first. Start with the abstract to learn the claim and method, skim the introduction to see the problem and why it matters, and jump to the conclusion for the takeaway. Scan the section headings and figures to judge relevance. If it looks central, then read it carefully and annotate it for your question, not for general content. Ask yourself, what's the claim? What evidence supports it? Are there leaps from data to interpretation? Does it actually connect to my question? In my paper, will this source support, complicate, or contrast my position? If you do these habits, use databases, filter well, follow citation trails, and skim purposefully, you'll cut the noise in half and double the quality of what you keep. Step 5 is to turn a topic into a research question. At this point, you've explored enough to start shaping your own direction. All research begins with a topic, something you're curious about, but a topic alone is too broad to analyze. You can't write a paper that explains everything about animal rights. You need to narrow it into a focused, debatable, and researchable question. So you might ask, do animals have moral rights or only instrumental value? Or should animal testing in medicine be banned, restricted, or redefined? Or could granting legal personhood to animals protect ecosystems more effectively than current environmental laws? These questions are focused enough to explore, but open-ended enough to require reasoning and evidence. As you read, you'll form what's called a working thesis, your best initial answer to that question. Maybe you begin with, animals deserve basic rights because they can feel pain. That's a start, but it's too general. As you learn more, you'll notice the real debate isn't whether animals feel pain. I mean, most scientists agree that they do, but how that fact should shape their moral or legal status. So you tighten your thesis into, because animals experience pain and emotion, they deserve limited moral rights that protect them from unnecessary suffering, even when human interests are at stake. Later, after exploring counterarguments, you might refine again. Rather than granting animals full human-style rights, societies should adopt a graduated model of responsibility, scaling moral consideration to each animal's cognitive and social capabilities. That evolution isn't uncertainty, it's the process of deepening your thoughts. So step 6 is to map the conversation and find your entry point. Now that you have a question and a working thesis, you're ready to understand how experts are already talking. Imagine walking into a meeting that's already in progress. Around the table are a philosopher, a neuroscientist, a legal scholar, an agricultural expert, and a policy analyst. They're mid-debate. Your job isn't to interrupt, it's to listen, take notes, and figure out where your voice fits. From your desk, make a one-page set of meeting minutes. Write down 6 or 7 key thinkers or organizations and one plain sentence for each summarizing their main claim. For instance, Peter Singer argues for equal consideration based on capacity to suffer, while Tom Reagan says animals are subject of a life with inherent value. Carl Cohen maintains that rights require moral agency, while Martha Nussbaum promotes a capabilities approach, enabling each species to flourish according to its nature. Then, mark how each relates to your own stance, which supports your view, opposes it, complicates it. Then, draw lines to show overlap or tension. Next, identify your entry point where you can add something new. Think in 2 ways. An open question is a problem that hasn't been settled. For example, can a capabilities framework translate into tiered legal protections without collapsing into welfare? An action item is the next step you can take to explore it, such as connecting empirical cognition studies to policy enforcement. When you can articulate both, you are no longer summarizing, you're contributing. Step 7 is to build the paper with context, conversation, and contribution. Once you can really hear the conversation happening among the sources, you're ready to start writing. Now, this is where a lot of students fall into a trap. They organize their paper by source, one paragraph for each article. It ends up sounding like Singer says this, Reagan says that, Cohen disagrees. That kind of writing lists information, but it doesn't build an argument. Instead, organize your paper by idea, not by author. Each section should explore a major theme or question that drives your argument forward. Let's use our animal rights example. You might have one section on the moral basis of rights, another on the limits of rights, and a third on the practical frameworks, things like welfare reforms, legal personhood, or cultural change. Within each section, you want to synthesize, not summarize. That means weaving voices together so readers can see the tension and the through line. So you might say something like, most philosophers agree that sentience gives animals some moral relevance. Cohen challenges that, arguing that rights require reciprocal duty. Reagan rejects that view, saying that being a subject of a life is enough. When you frame it in that way, the real issue comes into focus. The debate isn't about whether animals matter, it's about how moral value itself should be defined. To keep your paper balanced, use what I call the rhythm of context, conversation, and contribution. The context sets the stage, so what's the issue and why does it matter right now? The conversation shows who's saying what and how their ideas conflict or connect. And the contribution is your voice, what you're adding and why it matters. That rhythm works at every level, across the whole essay, inside each section, and even within individual paragraphs. It keeps your writing organized and purposeful. Treat your sources as tools, not decorations. Each source you include should be doing real work for you. It should either support, complicate, or contrast your claim. Those are your 3 moves. If you're not sure what a source is doing, it probably doesn't belong in your essay. When you quote, remember, we don't quote because we can't say it ourselves. We quote for authority and precision. The goal is to bring an expert voice into the room and use their exact phrasing when it matters. But don't just drop a quote and walk away. Introduce it and then interpret it. So you can say, as Peter Singer argues, the capacity for suffering is the vital characteristic that gives a being the right to equal consideration. Then add your own line. That reframes moral status. It's not about intelligence or language, but about the ability to experience harm. So that commentary is where your analysis happens. To keep yourself organized, build what's called a literature matrix. It's just a simple table with columns for author and year, the main claim, the type of evidence, and how it relates to your thesis, whether it supports, complicates, or contrasts it. Once you fill that in, patterns will start to appear. You'll see which sources belong together and where your biggest debates or gaps are. At that point, your outline practically writes itself. Each paragraph in your paper should also have its own internal shape. I like to teach it as 5 parts: the claim, the context, the conversation, the commentary, and the anchor. Here's how it might sound. The claim is the main idea, so moral consideration can scale with cognitive complexity. The context adds background. Studies in animal cognition show major differences among species. The conversation brings in the sources, Singer, Reagan, etc. Each offer different ways to think about moral standing. Then comes the commentary, your interpretation of how those ideas fit together. Taken as a whole, they point to a middle ground that avoids the extremes of all or nothing rights, while rejecting pure utility. Finally, the anchor ties it forward. You might say, this scaling framework forms the foundation for the next section. That structure keeps every paragraph connected to your argument instead of floating off on its own. And finally, anticipate counter-arguments. Every strong paper does. In the animal rights debate, for instance, one major objection is that rights require reciprocity, understanding and upholding duties which animals lack. Acknowledge that. Say, that's a valid point. Animals can't enter moral contracts. But then explain why that doesn't end the discussion. You might respond, rights aren't only contractual, they're also protective. Infants and people with disabilities also lack moral agency, yet we still recognize their rights because of their capacity for suffering and vulnerability. When you meet opposition honestly, your credibility goes up, and so does the strength of your argument. Once you've built your draft, it's time to step back and refine it. I like to tell my students to revise in 3 passes: structure, logic, and style. First, check structure. Go paragraph by paragraph and label what each one is doing. Is it giving context, summarizing the conversation, or adding your own contribution? If you notice that one of those dominates for too long, rebalance it. Every section should move through that full rhythm: context, conversation, contribution. Second, check logic. For every claim you make, ask yourself, what would have to be true for this point to hold up? If that reasoning isn't visible on the page, add it. This step is where your thinking becomes clear. Third, check style. Read your paper aloud. You'll hear immediately whether it's working. If it sounds like a list of facts, you're still summarizing. If it sounds like ideas linking together, building questioning, responding, then you're really arguing. That final check is what turns a stack of information into a thoughtful piece of scholarship. And that's what real research is: thinking in public. It's not about perfection or having the final answer. It's about showing your reader how you've reasoned your way toward understanding. And honestly, this goes far beyond the classroom. The same skills that make a good researcher, asking sharp questions, evaluating evidence, weighing perspectives, and building a reasoned position, are the same skills you need in the real world. Whether you're reading news, making professional decisions, or just trying to understand a complex issue, these steps help you think clearly and communicate responsibly. So remember, you started with a topic, you learned how to search like a scholar, you filtered what you found, you skimmed and questioned, and then you built something new out of it: a clear, thoughtful contribution to a larger conversation. That's the real purpose of research: not to repeat what's already known, but to join the work of discovery and making meaning with others. If you follow these steps, you won't just write a paper, you will be doing real scholarship. You'll think alongside experts, not just about them, and you'll learn to add something thoughtful and original to an ongoing human conversation. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please consider subscribing so that you can continue to get help with writing, research, and literature. Be well.